Hello, this is Susan Bird, and you are listening to the Curated Conversations podcasts. In this series, East Meets West, and vice versa, we're exploring the new conversations taking place between Asia and the West on a variety of subjects. With me today, here in New York, is Summer Danwai Wang, who for over the past 5 years has been a financial correspondent, most recently at Tencent America, the major Chinese media outlet, covering the U.S. financial market and industry news. She reports live from the New York Stock Exchange, known as NYSE, and NASDAQ, and does weekly interview shows on financial and economic topics. Summer covers a wide variety of business events, from Berkshire Hathaway's annual meetings to major U.S. market initial public offerings known as IPOs. She has interviewed business leaders including Warren Buffett, the famed American investor and philanthropist, Japanese business leader Masayoshi Son, the founder and CEO of SoftBank, as well as chairman of Sprint, and the Nobel Economic Prize recipient Michael Spence. Summer speaks English, French, and Mandarin. Welcome to Curated Conversations, Summer.
Thank you, Susan.
So, my first question is, when we talk about the conversations that take place between Asia and the West, what does that bring to mind for you? What comes to your mind?
I think it reminds me of my childhood memory. I was brought up in Dalian. It's a city in China. So when I was brought up, we kind of reach out a lot to the outside world instead of the local news. When I was here in the US, I found that a lot of people are focused on the local stuff. Warren Buffett bought a local newspaper. Before that, I never know that the local newspaper will worth that much. So for me, it's like we are used to know about the world, what happens globally. So I think it's understand the other part and it's more about each other, because right now a lot of work are done collaboratively. You cannot done things by yourself. So I think by knowing the West more, I can understand how the Western people think. So that's interesting to me.
So have you seen, let's see, you came here in 2009, is that right?
Yeah.
So has the dialogue shifted at all? Does this seem any different? Are your impressions different than they were, that is, some years ago?
My first job is being a reporter. I think that's lucky because I got to know a lot of different kind of people. But there is a former generation of Chinese reporters in the U.S., like in the 90s. There are Chinese reporters here reporting U.S. to the Chinese audience. I found at that time they will just find something interesting that new to the Chinese people. For example, in New York, there is a certain fashion style. But right now, we tend to go deeper. For example, right now in Cleveland, there is a convention there. So the Chinese outlets, a lot of them will send reporters to really go deep into the politics of the U.S. But you cannot imagine that 20 years ago.
That's interesting, and I think we certainly haven't gotten to the point where we would be sending reporters to be watching and reporting on all the local politics. Certainly, perhaps in Beijing, we'd do that. But I could imagine that otherwise we have less of a global appetite than we should have as a nation, I think, at least some people.
But I feel that the Chinese generally treat foreign journalists very well, and they give them a lot of opportunities. For example, certain government officials or some big companies will prefer Bloomberg or foreign outlets to report on their news first, to give the news resources. So I cannot believe it happened here in New York. So that's different.
So let's talk about the world of business where you spend your time, specifically around financial markets and the companies who participate in them. How is the downturn in the Chinese economy affecting the U.S. financial markets from your perspective?
The Chinese economy downturn? I actually don't think that affects the U.S. that much, because in the past 2 years, especially last year and the first half of this year, I saw a lot of acquisitions and mergers happen here in the U.S. A lot of Chinese people, big companies will spend billions of dollars to acquire good assets in the U.S. because the RMB is depressing. So I think in that perspective, a lot of Chinese will really will catch a chance to use their money to really to do business globally. We can name a few. For example, my company, Tencent, they just spent, I think, $8 billion to buy a gaming company here in the US. So I think that's very promising.
So in China, we know that people born in the last 30 years in China have been living in a country where growth has been exponential, really. So what's the mood there, especially among the middle class, about this downturn? Is this a threat to them? Are they concerned? How would you say, what's your perspective?
I think on the one hand, Chinese people are living much, much better than before. In the past, like 20 years ago, if you say you're going abroad, everybody will say, oh, you will earn a lot of money and there is a promising life ahead of you. But it turned out that people who came to the US 20 years ago, they generally didn't earn as much as their peers in China. Because in China, if you own a real estate property in Beijing, Shanghai, or Guangzhou, you are a millionaire. So that's different. But on the other hand, I feel that the Chinese middle class, their lack of sense of security, so they don't spend that much. Yeah, they spend much more than before, but it's not like in the US. You can swipe your credit card and buy everything you want. But in China, everybody will keep a lot of money in the bank, and they will maybe plan trips, but they don't. Their spending style is totally different with here in the US.
So you mentioned people saying 20 years ago that they'd assumed that you had a great deal of wealth if you came abroad, and now that's changed somewhat because there's so many people coming here. But what about the growing disparity of wealth in China? Is that a potential problem politically as well as economically, that the middle class may be feeling somewhat squeezed between those people who are really wealthy and the others?
I think so. I think that actually the gap between the rich and poor is widening in China. The rich will become much richer in China, and there is still a lot of poor people in the rural area or sometimes in the city. But in China, there is still a lot of opportunities. So the economy is still growing. Yes, we are not growing at 10% a year, but 6% is really impressive, I think, and they provide a lot of opportunities for the Chinese. I have a lot of entrepreneurs friends, and they are educated here in the US, but they prefer to do their startups in China. Nearly most of them, every one of them told me that there were much larger market in China, and there were much more opportunities in China. And right now, the Chinese government are tackling on the corruption, the official corruption. So that's very inspiring, and people like that kind of reform. So that's another part, the aspect of the hope in China as well.
So you're bringing up the entrepreneurs raises a question in my mind about innovation in general in China. The assumption has been that partly because of the educational system and for some other factors, that China has not been a place where children are trained to be questioners and that they think innovatively. So I would imagine that a lot of the innovation that's occurring in China right now is occurring among the people who have come to the West, been educated here, gone there and started their companies. Is that a correct assumption, or am I wrong about that?
It's very interesting because last year I spent 8 months in Silicon Valley, and I interviewed a lot of American venture capitalists, and we were discussing about the difference between the startups in China and in the US. We think that the innovation hub is still in Silicon Valley in New York City. But in China, we can see a lot of new startups. The US startup may emphasize on innovation, but the Chinese one may emphasize on their huge market operation. The Chinese startups are much more efficient than American ones. I have a friend, a Chinese friend, who joined a US startup. He told me he can never imagine how slow it is in a US startup because he used to work in the Chinese companies. And I also recently read an article about the lifestyle difference between Chinese entrepreneurs and the US entrepreneurs. I just came back from China. I visited a lot of friends there. You can see they're all very busy, and they will work till midnight is very normal. But in the US, you can still feel people. Startups no difference between from another job. For them, it's just happened easily. It's because I think because they are educated in that way. In their childhood, they will do a lot of innovative things, and they will have a lot of projects done by themselves. But in China, they have to take the examinations, or they have to study. So I think there's a difference there.
Well, there certainly is a work ethic there that's pretty impressive. That ambition runs high, and people really feel that they have a real shot at making something important happen. I'm wondering, from what you said, if there's a difference in the way innovation is even viewed. That is, that in the U.S., for the most part, innovation means you've done something truly disruptive. It didn't exist yesterday. It exists now because of you and your efforts. Whereas in China, because of the size of the market there, you can bring something and tweak it in some way. And then because of its applicability to so many people, you can have a very big company quickly. So the innovation itself doesn't have to be so totally disruptive. Is that possibly correct?
Yeah, you may heard the term copy to China. So I admit, maybe a decade ago, a lot of companies, successful companies in China are operated in that way. For example, during the 2000 dot bubble in the US, a lot of Chinese-listed companies here, when they are pitching their investors here, they will say, oh, I'm the Yahoo of China, I'm the Facebook in China. But right now, I feel a lot of Chinese companies, big companies, they already have the resources and abilities to do innovation themselves, and they want to go abroad. I went to Mexico last month, and I see the advertisement of Huawei everywhere. Huawei is a Chinese company, and their technology is pretty advanced. So I already see a lot of innovation in China. And also, I think right now, if you really want to depend on technology disruptive, that period has already passed. For example, in the time in the era of Google, you're really good at it, your searching technology. But right now, if you have a new technology, it's really very easy to be surpassed. So people do not depend on technology innovation that much anymore. It's become everybody learning from each other instead of if you have a technology, you will be successful for a long time.
That's interesting because you've said several things there. One, that Chinese companies no longer really have to benchmark themselves, at least in a branding sense, against Western companies. And you're also saying that the innovation itself may not be so much the central core of the success of a company, but in fact the execution on what is a good idea and this ability to sort of build on other people's success. Not so much in a copying sense, but in a more collaborative sense, whether or not it's voluntary collaboration is really interesting. You said you were just recently in China. I'm curious, do your friends in China think you know all things about the West, and vice versa? When people meet you here, do they think you can be the spokeswoman for China?
That's another interesting topic because in China, in our team, we have 30 reporters cover different industries in China. But here in the US, in the financial sector, we only have 2 people, me and another colleague. Yes, we have another 2 or 3 colleagues in Silicon Valley covering the tech sector. But in terms of the whole US financial market, it's only 2 people covering this. So we cannot say that we understand every sector, so we have to do a lot of study work before our interviews or before we start writing our articles. But yes, the Chinese people and our colleagues, they will think that you have to know everything about the US. So whenever there is some news and some big events happening in the US, they will turn to us.
What about the increased pressure regarding privacy issues? Are there big differences in views about privacy in China versus the U.S.? I suppose in some ways that's a two-headed question. One is about censorship, and the other is about people's demand for privacy, how they regard their own information.
I think in the first sense, Chinese news people who work in the news industry, they're great people because they can still do good news under the censorship. So they kind of after all these years, we kind of work with this issue quite well. So we know it's a different situation in China and in the US. But still, for example, our team, we can still do very deep research on certain sensitive topics. That's allowed. But when you're writing a report, you have to discuss with your editor. You want to present the facts and the whole thing, but you don't want to touch the red line. So that's a skill we have to acquire being a Chinese reporter. About the individual privacy, yes, people want to know more. But I think right now in China, people's main goal in life is to live a better life instead of, I want to have my privacy. That is not that emphasized much in China.
Maybe it's a matter of timing, that here people are so self-satisfied perhaps that they want to hold on to their own, including everything about themselves. Whereas in China, they're busy pursuing their ambition for this better life that appears to be truly a possibility, or certainly up until very recently was viewed as an endless possibility.
And also I think democracy need to be educated. We are not born this way. American has the European history, and you struggle with your system for 200 years. I think you need to give China some time. And Chinese learning is not like North Korea or something. So I think the time period, we are very comfortable with that time period. I think China will be more open and to achieve what is that in our own way.
Your family is still in China. You're here. Are your plans to go back to China eventually, or do you want to be here permanently? What's your ambition?
Mm-hmm. For me, I don't emphasize that much on where I work, where I live. I kind of want to achieve my ideas. For example, if I want to do media, I will focus on what I can do in this perspective. I was educated both in China and in the US, so when I were looking for a job, I think to report on the US financial market will be my advantage. So that's why I'm staying here. But I can see a lot of my friends, they have a strong preference. A lot of them will say, I will go back to China because my network is in China, I have resources in China. Another group of them will think, I definitely have to stay in the US no matter what because I like the life here. I like the air is not polluted, so it's different.
Speaking of polluted air, it sounds as if, although I've been to China a number of times, I'm still an outsider in the sense that I'm trying to understand the views of people, especially around environmental issues. And it looks to me, as an outsider, that the government has been at least somewhat responsive, really, to basic public opinion, that people have voiced their concern about it, and thus there has been action taken. Maybe not as much as everyone would like, but that they are responsive to public opinion. Is that correct? So there's this balance, as you said earlier, regarding censorship. I guess the same thing applies to the freedom of speech issue, which is that people are allowed to speak to a point. How does that all work?
I think right now it's pretty good because people can joke about the situation. It's not like no one dare to talk about it. And another thing is that reporters can report on the issue, and it's liked by the government. The government wants reporters to report the industry that are doing a lot of pollution. For example, my colleague, Mr. Feng Jun, he's in our Beijing office, and he has done a report about a certain coal industry in Shanxi province, and they produce a lot of pollution there. And his report won a big prize, news prize in China, and Mr. Feng himself was brought to Premier Li, and Premier Li really talked to him about this issue. So I think the government really want more reporters to cover that. Yes, sometimes when a big pollution happens, I think Chinese people are very humorous, and they know they are living under these bad circumstances. But you know the pollution in Beijing is very bad, but there are still people pouring into the city, and people want the opportunities that's the sacrifice they have to take. So we always joke about it. I think that's pretty cool.
Are there other issues that you'd like to mention regarding this whole East meets West issue? Anything that is on your mind that you think would be fascinating to touch on?
Earlier we talked about actually the U.S. people don't care that much about the news globally. So I wonder what's the situation right now. So there's still a group of people really are keen on international news, and the other group of people they will reserve in their local news, or do you think the gap between the two teams, two group of people are widening? Or?
It's a very interesting question. I personally feel that it's almost as if we have two groups of people here, and one of those, especially I'm thinking of the young, let's take people under 35 years of age, that people here are either highly global in their viewpoint, they live on the web, they have friends all over the world, some they've never met, most of whom they've never met, but they really do think globally. I have a son who lives in Hong Kong, for example. And then there is another group of people who are very local in their viewpoint. They care about what happens in their local sports teams. They're interested in fashion issues that are really fairly parochial. And they're not big thinkers. It's an interesting dichotomy here in the States. The fact is everyone has access to the world today. Whether one picks it up and runs with it is another thing, and I think it has a lot to do with the way families converse about what's important to them. But one way or the other, I mean, the very reason for this East Meets West podcast is that I think there's more and more interest on the part of people all over the world about what's happening everywhere because we are so connected.
Yeah.
Anything else that comes to your mind?
I think it's quite an interesting experience to be an interviewee instead of an interviewer.
I'll bet.
Yeah, I think it's really, I learned a lot. It's my first time actually, I think, being a really interviewee in the U.S. I used to be the person who asks questions. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Well, you're a good sport because the circumstances here with a lot of outside noise were not ideal, but I think it's been a lot of fun, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Summer Denwai Wang, who for over the past 5 years has been a financial correspondent at 10 Cent America, the major Chinese media outlet, covering U.S. financial market and industry news, has joined us today live for Curated Conversations. She normally reports herself live from the New York Stock Exchange, NYSE, and NASDAQ, and does weekly interview shows on financial and economic topics. Summer covers a wide variety of business events like Berkshire Hathaway's annual meeting, as well as major U.S. market initial public offerings, the IPOs of the day. She's interviewed business leaders, thought leaders of all kinds, including the Nobel Economic Prize recipient Michael Spence. Summer speaks English, French, and Mandarin and joined us here in New York today as part of our podcast series East Meets West and vice versa, where we explore the new conversations taking place between Asia and the West on a variety of subjects. I'm Susan Bird.